Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Open Network User Group podcast. I'm Mark Tierney, ONUG CTO. Today, I'll be joined by Mark Hinkle, co-founder and CEO of TriggerMesh. We're going to talk about the important role TriggerMesh played in the MVP demonstration of the cloud security notification framework at ONUG Spring. Gosh, it was just 6 weeks ago, and it was a lot of fun and really productive. And after that, we're going to talk a little bit about event-driven architectures in general with Mark and find out just what they're all about in that space. All right, but first, ONUG Fall 2022. It's going to be another hybrid event. It's going to be even more successful than this spring. Fall in Manhattan, October 19th and 20th. It's going to be at Center 415 on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. Things could get crazy. I could get crazy because we'll be in Manhattan, but that's just how it works. All right, so join the ONUG community of Global 2000 companies, enterprise architects, cloud providers, and leaders as we explore the building blocks required to create flexible, transformative IT business platforms. And you'll know they work because you saw them at ONUG. Go to onug.net to register for this event today. All right, again, joining me today is Mark Hinkle. I've gotten to know Mark here over the last several months, and he's trouble. But let's just start with letting him explain a little bit about his background. Mark, hey, thanks for joining me on the ONUG podcast, buddy.
Hey, thanks for having me, Mark. As you said, my name is Mark Hinkle. I'm the CEO and co-founder of TriggerMesh, and we help companies build event-driven architecture. My background, I am a tech guy by accident. I got a tech support job right out of college, and it turned into a 30-year career of me doing everything from internet to open source to being one of the original, executives at cloud companies back in the early 2000s. And now today I am focused on, doing open source cloud infrastructure and solving all hard problems. So that's me in a nutshell.
All right. So let me, it's funny. I've interviewed in previous podcast lives, I've interviewed a lot of C-levels, a lot of founders, a lot of fellows, that sort of thing. And I'm always amazed by the road, the path people take to where they're at. And I've always been a little bit shocked that, people ended up someplace they didn't expect. I mean, I studied aerospace engineering. I became a tech nerd, right? Like, that's just how it worked. I once interviewed a C-level big entrepreneur startup out in the Palo Alto area. He was an English major. Now he runs one of the biggest data, like anonymization, virtualization engine companies in the world. Like, what, you got an engineering degree?
Sort of.
Is that right? Like, what?
So I started out working on my engineering degree and decided that the deep technical stuff was not the kind of people I wanted to work with, ironically, and finished up getting a business degree. And I ended up doing financial services at the beginning of my career and hated it. And when I quit my job, my buddy was going to apply at one of the first internet service providers, PSINet. And he's a terrible driver and bad with directions. So I gave him a ride, did the interview since I was there anyhow. After paying all my tuition, I took a $7.50 an hour phones tech support job to get the free training. And within 3 years, I was running a 2,500 person department at a $14 billion company. And it was a very interesting start. And now I've done everything from networking and system administration to today we do open source software development. So yeah.
Now you sit at home and count your money. Like, I love it. It's fantastic. What a story.
There's not a ton of money selling free software, Mark, but
okay, so it's easy to count. Like, that's
we're doing the yeoman's work of keeping the internet running.
Nice. Well, so the space you're in now is it's pretty interesting, as it turns out. Super helpful to to what's happening at ONUG. So let me give a quick backdrop, just for those of you who might be new to ONUG in the space. We're currently neck deep into an open source initiative called the Cloud Security Notification Framework. It's all about normalizing security alert messaging, but it's part of a much bigger framework. We just chose to work on security alerting first, and it's all about reducing toil for large enterprises as they consume multi-cloud. We're in a situation where all the cloud service providers provide, different messaging for any particular security event. So if you were to look at MITRE ATT&CK as a framework, any one of those attack vectors or types, as they're classified, have and manifest into different messages from each of the cloud providers. And it's a mess. And it creates a mess for the DevSecOps teams and a lot of toil and honestly, a lot of background noise. And so that's what we're working on at ONUG. And part of the framework includes an ingestion process. And but there's more to it than that. But it seemed perfect for what Trigger Mesh was all about, and so you guys jumped in. So, what do you, Mark, from your perspective? Why don't you maybe give a little bit of overview of why you feel like Trigger Mesh fit in that process, and that helps maybe set the background for what you're all about.
Yeah. I think even stepping back from the project, it's just all about the way we consume IT. Back in the good old days when I started, most of our stuff was hosted on-prem, and then we started using service providers, and then the cloud providers were sort of the evolution of the service provider, and a lot of folks were single cloud provider users. But as time progresses, there's a lot of different services and reasons to use multiple cloud providers. And so everyone's multi-cloud, and every cloud is a different, domain with a different way of speaking. So we saw the need to be sort of the Rosetta Stone for all of these different cloud providers and making it easy for users to integrate messages between them and to drive event-driven workloads and do follow the same patterns that these providers do individually, but across the fabric of all the clouds and on-prem. So when we saw what ONUG was working on, which was unifying the messaging from the big three providers, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, it was perfect for us because we were looking for use cases. Software folks are always folks look with a solution looking for a problem, and the ability to work with end users like the ones in ONUG who were trying to scratch their own itch but knew what they wanted but didn't have the technology to implement it. It was a perfect match for us, just for the fact that you have 3 different playbooks for 3 different clouds and more in the future. We're just addressing in CSNF those 3 cloud providers right now, but you're going to add additional cloud providers.
IBM's in the mix, Oracle's in the mix. Obviously, smaller players, but relevant nonetheless. I mean, they're important. I think of IBM, for example. They obviously a big play in the enterprise space, and some interesting plug-in points for event-driven architectures that you provide. Let me stop for just a second, though, and ask, if you could, for someone who doesn't know, what is an event-driven architecture? What does that mean? What is an event-driven architecture?
So when you have systems, every time something happens in a system, that's an event. And that event typically has a message that has some metadata and typically a payload. So I've added a row into a database, or if in the security context, we've been accessed by a host that is in a less than safe part of the world. And those things create messages, and those messages go into logs. And in the old days, you might have batched up messages. So a good example is when you put your check into the bank, you don't get it to show up till the next day, because all the checks deposited in the bank happen overnight, and it's in a batch. In an event-driven architecture, you have these messages that don't just happen in batches, but they happen in real time. So you stream messages based on changes. So for example, someone accesses a host that's on Azure's cloud, and immediately a message is generated, and that message can be forwarded to somewhere else for it to be analyzed. And as it happens, that message is forwarded in real time. So there's less lag between data. So you may forward it to Azure Sentinel, you may forward it to Splunk, you may forward it there. And as we add more and more of these systems, we're decoupling them from big monolithic Java systems to more service-oriented systems, microservices, where the way to communicate back and forth is not necessarily just APIs, which is a conversational way to go, but for a event-driven. So you may subscribe and get all events and drink from the fire hose, and then process the events you need to do whatever it is, sync data between a database and Snowflake, to kick off a serverless function on Amazon Lambda, that kind of thing.
All right, so you guys entered the scene, put your shingle out, 2018. Explain to me how it is that Gartner reports you in about a year ago, almost to the week. Gartner reports you as what was it? The honor to be recognized as cool vendor. What is that all about? Like, who do you have to pie off to get that to happen?
Well, for once, I didn't have to show up with a brown bag full of money.
Nice.
Cool vendors are folks who are in a vertical within Gartner's purview, and they are doing something unique and different. So if I'm looking at the way people do integrations today, it's very much API driven. And as I said, it's a back and forth. So I query an API, get an answer, I submit it to another API, versus just drinking from the fire hose all the time. And that delivers the data faster. So that's the uniqueness of us versus, say, one of the legacy kind of integration platforms. We're also cloud native, and cloud native just implies we follow cloud design architecture, but it doesn't necessarily have to happen in Amazon or Google. It could happen on premises on something like Kubernetes and be containerized and follow this pattern. So we brought integration to light in an event-driven, cloud native, and open source are the three sort of distinguishing characteristics that are different than what they've seen in the past.
So Gartner called you out for your multi-cloud strategy, and how most companies really aren't prepared to handle those complexities, positioning you as a management tool to deal with some of those issues. One of the things that was in the report was innovations in containers and serverless platform technologies. And I'm going to ask you a question I ask every executive, if not architect, when the words serverless and containers come up. My observation is always, when you ask, who's doing serverless, who's doing containers, the answer is just about everybody, right? But when I ask the follow-up question of how many of your mission critical applications have been migrated to take advantage of these things, the answer's not that big. Like it's not as large a deployment as you might sort of expect today. What's your experience of that? I'm totally putting you on the spot on that, Mark. But I mean, are you seeing that in the?
Well, you got to remember. So serverless really started with Amazon Lambda, and it was almost 100% greenfield. So the biggest workload on Lambda to start was Node.js, and Node.js had only been around a little while. It was bringing JavaScript to the server. I actually I was the executive director of Node.js. So that's what got me interested in serverless. So first off, your runtime initially was very limited to Node.js, so you couldn't move everything to serverless. Since then, the runtimes for things like Python and Java and Ruby and others have been added. But the architecture is very, very monolithic for a lot of those legacy apps. So, and the other thing is that serverless is not a silver bullet for everything. They don't do especially well with stateful workloads. Serverless isn't especially good for long running workloads, so data mining activities. The idea was that if you ran a serverless workload, a lot of times overutilization of VMs, like EC2, you were paying for the whole hour. And what Amazon saw was that most people didn't want to pay for the whole hour. They had a workload that took up 10 minutes. So if they started charging a price that was higher than the 10 minutes as an EC2, but lower than what you would pay for the full hour, it was good for the company and good for them because they could over provision their servers. So that's the how it works. The reason I feel like people aren't, wholesale for mission critical is unless you're in a greenfield, and even then, you probably have a very complex combination of, traditional servers. So if you're in financial, I guarantee you that you have mainframes. You're not moving mainframes to serverless, even though you can run COBOL in a serverless function. I think Netlify has.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
And you love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know you love COBOL.
Yeah. Actually, we just did for a large global car rental agency. They wanted to integrate their COBOL copybooks with their Amazon SQS. And I would have never in a million years guessed that as a use case we would have had, but we did it. And it was interesting because serverless has a lot of benefits. There's a lot of utility in it. The utility is in scaling up. So if you want to be responsive, you want to do things on the edge like you can with the Netlify's JavaScript on the edge, things like that, it has a lot of utility. But if you're not breaking apart everything into a service-oriented architecture, which is the term, we have enough gray hair to remember when that was in vogue, or now we say a microservices architecture, you can't just lift and shift to the cloud and see benefits because, the migration and the potential disruption to what you're doing today is.
Well, I feel like at the root of what you're talking about, I mean, you said it already, stateful. I mean, it really begs the question: why is the enterprise running so many stateful applications still? Like, what is in the way? I call them enterprises with baggage. They can't unload this baggage. They don't know how to unload this baggage, or they don't know how to interoperate with tools or systems that can fake it out, right? One way or another, they're stuck with their old stateful applications. Is that fair, or am I being
I mean, I think there are some workloads that you need state, but a lot of them, that was just the design of the times,
right?
Sort of like, horses and buggies was the convention of the 1900s before the automobile. Sure. But eventually people modernized.
All right. Well, we're trying to modernize. So let's talk about CSNF. And you saw some of the greatness. Tell me a little bit. Tell the audience a little bit about how you. First of all, I mean, I'd love for the audience to hear your impressions of the initiative in general. Feel free to just fawn over it and. Maybe dig a little deeper into what you're doing for us.
Yeah. So first off, I just wanted, the thing that was interesting to me is, and being a open source guy who has been representative to a lot of industry consortia, the project itself is from the demand side. So it's actual end users trying to solve the problems together. So that was one of the most attractive things to me, rather than a bunch of vendors trying to establish a standard that we're going to enforce on some poor, end user someday for a lot of money. So that was interesting. The other thing was that there seemed to be a agreement across multiple users and security vendors on what a event should look like for security. I guess a couple weeks ago, we voted on and confirmed the canonical data model.
Canonical data model. Yep.
Yeah. So that's interesting as well. As this is what we think a security event should look like. And then it came down to how do we extract that information? And that's what brought us to the table, because we've been working with a variety of use cases, but this was a good meaty one where we had plenty of end users coming together that said, this is a real problem. It's hard to hire good security professionals. It's hard to hire anyone in IT right now. There's just the great resignation to get, talent is tough. Automating and making the talent that you do have more efficient was interesting to us. And we're an automation and integration company, so we saw how we could really move the ball forward with a, consolidation of all these data streams into one single stream that could be consumed by the tools that you wanted to use. And we were agnostic to any of the sources or targets for this data. It was just fun putting it together. We were playing telephone with really cool, interesting data that makes their lives better.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the work that you did to integrate in with CSNF. I mean, you're in a best position to sort of describe that.
Yeah. So if we go back to our earlier event-driven architecture discussion, all of the cloud providers seem to provide a stream of security events. And that means that all of the end users are drinking from the fire hose all the time. So we came along and said, we can be the nozzle, and we can take these streams, whether they're, from whatever cloud provider, take our transformation engine and then spit out a event that is consumable by a variety of SIMs and SOARs in the security space that can interact and send them to Splunk. So for us, we felt like we were a great solution to connect all these data streams and make the data that's in those streams actionable. And actionable could be, sending it to Splunk for analysis, sending it to Azure Sentinel or IBM Q Radar, or just sending messages of a certain type to Slack to say, this is a high level, priority one event. It falls into this, this level of severity in the MITRE framework, and go from there. So that was where we came. So we had the technology to do that. We had to add a couple of integrations with the endpoints, which was fun for Jeff the intern. I still call him Jeff the intern. 2 years ago, when we've had this conversation before, went from working the cashier at the vape shop, as a cashier at the vape shop, to being a world-class cloud engineer. And
it's really amazing.
Yeah. He just needed it was fortunate for us to meet, because he's the one that's done a lot of work with, the people from Cigna and Oracle and Microsoft, and everyone seems to be pleased with his work. And he's very good at figuring out how to make the experience better for folks who are struggling with way too much data and not a way to consume it. So
he's a quality talent. And to your point, like to me, it goes right back to sort of the, how amazing this initiative is. If you got 4 of the 5, biggest cloud service providers, you've got, juggernauts on the enterprise consumer side, like, FedEx and Raytheon and Fidelity and Intuit and, and others that are all like working together to make this happen. It's pretty amazing to have, a teammate from TriggerMesh come in, and they're all just kind of in awe of this guy, right? And what he's done to enable the architecture. So it's been a lot of fun too.
Yeah.
So, and to that end, for viewers and listeners, if you weren't able to make the spring conference, we were able to do a live demonstration there, and I'm pretty sure on the ONUG site we have a. It's not what we did in the pavilion, but I think we did a. It was sort of our backup presentation, and but anyone should be able to get access to the live demonstration, see what it was all about, including the trigger mesh piece. So I'd encourage everybody to check that out. All right, so what's on the horizon for trigger mesh, Mark? I see. Was it yesterday or day before yesterday? I think you guys dropped a 1.18. Um, and tell us what that means for your organization.
Yeah, I mean, every month as an open source project, we drop a new release, and that informs our commercial product. So what we're finding is that people that build services and software for their customers need an integration platform that is structured enough so that they're not always writing glue, but flexible enough for them to write integrations to all of their, proprietary or industry specific applications. So you'll probably see more and more of our customers being service providers of some sort or doing integrations so that they can enable their customers versus more of those point and click WYSIWYG kind of integration platforms that are made for specific, solid endpoints. Like, we want to be the enterprise's go-to Zapier type integration platform where you have the ability to connect any variety of services, data streams, et cetera, from one to another, but for the purpose of delivering some higher level product. We're plumbing, and plumbing is important, but the stuff you always see is the fixtures, the big,
Sure.
big bathtub, the marble showers, but without the pipes, you're going to have a heck of a mess. So
yeah, I mean, you're to that end. I mean, I don't want to inappropriately call anything out. You fill in the blanks, but just in the announcement, you're talking about improving telemetry, interoperability with Kong, um, enhancements for Amazon Event Bridge. Is that right?
yeah. So that's a good point. So I really like Kong. I'm friends with the fellows who started the company and run the company. They have the same investors as we do. But what Kong does is they're a more cloud native modern way to manage API gateways. So in the past, you probably have things like Apogee or MuleSoft. Today's along the same lines of being cloud native and open source. Kong, that's where Kong is. So they were a good fit for us because we can, while they're providing APIs, we're providing a real-time integration between their APIs. So the output of one API can inform the input of another. From a telemetry standpoint, a lot of folks are managing their cloud-native infrastructure with Grafana and Prometheus, and we added telemetry to make it easier to do that. And then we're always adding features that we think will facilitate the interactivity and interoperability between cloud providers. So it is, for us, there's lots and lots of improvements under the covers, but all it's doing from an end user standpoint is making things faster, more reliable, and easier to manage.
Nice. Well, on a selfish note, I'll just say you're also going the next step on the CSNF initiative. I don't want to give too many details yet because we're actually still hammering them out in the working group. But you're going to be materially involved in helping put together a starter kit for CSNF, and we're putting the color around what that's going to look like. But I just wanted to tell you on behalf of the ONUG community, we, and the consuming members appreciate what you're doing on the initiative. It's going to be super helpful.
Yeah. Well, we've been happy to be involved. It's actually a refreshing organization compared to some of the other ones I've worked with in the past. So it's been good.
It's probably just amazing leadership in the working groups. I don't want to make a big deal about it, but
yeah, I think the formats are very good, and people are actually doing work and not talking about standards. There's actually a product that comes from the working group, which for me is, in the distance past, you had standard bodies like the Open Group, and you have, IEEE, which are doing important work, but it takes a long time for those things to manifest. The work product right away is something that can become a de facto standard and something useful in a very short amount of time.
I'm going to actually use that to segue into a wrap. Just say, if you're not familiar with ONUG's working groups, get involved. We are all about putting forward ways that the enterprise consuming community, with the help of our supplier partners, can make your life easier. And the best way to do that is join the ONUG working group, join the collaborative. It's part of the business that I'm heavily involved in managing the collaborative process. It's made up of these amazing working groups. You can find out more about it by going to onug.net, figure that out. And while you're there, like I said, you can sign up for ONUG Fall 2022, October 19th and 20th in Manhattan. It's going to be a ball. And again, Mark, thanks for joining me today on behalf of the ONUG community. Thanks for all of you for joining us today, and we'll see you on the next ONUG podcast. Thanks, everybody.